The first whisper of her despair floated across the dead moon like a secret no one was meant to hear. For 13 days, she had been sending out a distress signal into the vast reaches of space, calling with a voice that hardly believed it would ever be answered. Her name, Amali, was not spoken aloud in all that time, for the only sign of life on this desolate place was the faint, incessant beep of a small transmitter. It was battered and half-broken, flickering with the last dregs of its energy. Every bit of her own energy was nearly gone as well, leached away by wounds, hunger, and the bitter cold. She sat against a crag of dark stone, the sky above her perpetually dim under the shadow of a colossal gas giant that orbited nearby. It cast a hazy purple glow across the ground. The reflection of that glow on the jagged, glassy surface of the moon had become her only companion. 13 days. She would have lost count if not for the way her mind insisted on reminding her of each passing hour, a silent torment that told her she was still alive when she perhaps shouldn't be. Her species did not cry tears in the same way humans did, yet she felt the trembling in her chest that served as the same raw expression of grief. She reached a trembling hand over her midsection, pressing against a scorched tear in the pale green armor that covered her torso. She felt the bruise of old blood beneath it, felt the ache of a wound that refused to heal. Her left leg was pinned in a makeshift splint made of scavenged metal rods and the cloth of her undersuit. The pain throbbed in waves. The torment in her mind was worse, though. Each beep of the beacon was a question. Why was she still calling for help from a galaxy that had already cast her aside? Day turned to an approximation of night, though the sky never changed much on this airless moon. The meager sunlight shifted angles. Darkness didn't truly exist here, only a shift in color from purple to a deeper, bruised lavender. Her mouth felt cracked and dry, her skin chilled. Any bit of warmth had to be saved by staying still, pressing her back against the stone where pockets of heat lingered from faint geothermal activity. As she braced her head back, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion, she let the dreamlike recollection swirl. She had disobeyed. That was her crime, as far as her people were concerned. She had seen innocence, a settlement of researchers who were marked for destruction. Her commanding officer insisted they were all traitors, all to be eradicated. But she had witnessed children clinging to parents, scientists who carried no weapons other than their own intellect. The kill order was given, and her squad complied with swift brutality. She alone had refused. She rerouted power in the planetary bombardment vessel to give the researchers time to flee. In that window, her superior was killed, presumably by rebel fire, and thus it was her fault. The moment the mission concluded, her superiors decided that a soldier who would hesitate was not one they could trust. They marked her as defective, put her on a transport, and arranged an accident that ended with her ship spiraling out of control, crashing onto this moon. She had survived by chance, or perhaps by fate, though she did not believe in fate anymore. Her eyes closed. The beep of the signal was faint. Her body felt heavier. For 13 days, she had slowly run out of oxygen. Though her race needed less than a human would, she was not immune to the slow suffocation. She had improvised, found small pockets in the rock that contained enough trapped atmosphere to sustain her. The local geology must have had unusual properties, because she was still breathing, though her chest burned with every shallow intake. She dozed in and out, uncertain if she was dying or merely drifting toward a sleep she wouldn't wake from. On the 14th day, the beep changed. Instead of being the lonely one-way pulse she had grown familiar with, it echoed back with a tiny, flickering anomaly. She stirred, thinking perhaps she had broken the unit in her delirium. Then she realized it was a stray frequency, faint as a whisper. She leaned forward, eyes wide. Something was out there in orbit. Could it be an enemy ship returning to finish the job? Adrenaline flared through her, but she had no strength to run. She only huddled there, pressing her back against the stone, waiting for the final blow. Time was slippery. She heard thrusters, a vague roar that trembled through the ground. and moments later saw a silhouette crossing the purple horizon. It was a small craft, nothing like the sleek vessels of her own people. The plating was dull, scratched, almost patchworked. She tried to push herself upright, but her splinted leg collapsed under the weight. The best she could do was shift closer to the beacon, her fingers trembling as she attempted to silence it, uncertain if she even wanted to be found. She heard footsteps soon after, boots crunching, on shards of volcanic glass. A shadow appeared at the mouth of the shallow alcove. It was bipedal, humanoid, but the proportions were off: broad shoulders, helmeted head, the posture of someone not adapted to this place. Then the figure took off the helmet's faceplate. She saw pale skin, short dark hair, human eyes scanning for threats. She could sense it was a male, raised something in her direction. She tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, light flickered as he illuminated her with a handheld lamp. He muttered in a language that reached her translator as something like, "Easy now, easy," though it came through with a distorted accent. Her name was on her lips, but she hadn't spoken it in so long that the syllables were foreign to her tongue. He knelt, offering her a container of water. Without thinking, she grasped it. Her hands shook so badly that a small stream leaked out over her chin when she drank. The water was cold, stinging her throat, but it was life. She gasped, tried to cough, and nearly collapsed in pain. The man caught her, bracing her with one arm across her back. He wore a jacket that smelled of engine oil and sweat, an oddly comforting aroma compared to the sterile frost of this place. "Can you understand me?" he asked, voice tense. When she blinked, uncertain, he tried again. "I picked up your signal. My name is Jace. I'm here to help. Don't worry." She recognized it more clearly the second time, thanks to her translator device, though it was faint and glitchy. She parted her lips. The word she intended to speak came out as a rasp. "Go. You shouldn't be here." She barely recognized her own voice. "Too late," he replied. "I already am." He gently lifted the tangle of her hair, examining a ragged wound near her temple. The warmth of his hand made her shiver. "You look pretty bad. Let me get you somewhere safer." She tried to protest, but her chest burned and her leg screamed with pain. She felt him slide an arm beneath her knees. She hated feeling this helpless, just a burden, but she found no strength to fight. He carried her out into the open, where a battered ship waited. The vessel's ramp was lowered, vents hissing with faint steam. She tasted the stale air of its interior as he carried her aboard. She realized in that moment that she didn't even know if he was an ally or an opportunist. Perhaps he wanted salvage or a hostage. She reached for a sidearm that was half buried in the wreckage of her crashed ship, but she had left it behind days ago, too weak to carry. There was no choice now but to trust him or risk certain death outside. Inside, the temperature was marginally warmer. He eased her onto a cramped cot in what seemed to be an improvised med bay. The hum of the ship's life support and engines was the sweetest sound she had heard in days, besides, perhaps, that first sliver of hope that someone had answered her call. She drew in a shaky breath. "Name," he said, rummaging through a dented storage locker to find medical supplies. "Do you have a name?" She exhaled. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Amali." He repeated it, clumsy on his tongue, but genuine. "Okay, Amali. Let's see what we can do about this injury." He positioned a small scanner near her side. She tensed, remembering the sharp, traitorous glances of those who once called her comrade. But this man's eyes were steady, concerned. He had the roughness of someone used to patching up minor wounds, not a professional doctor. When the scanner beeped, he frowned. "You're in bad shape. The atmosphere here must have forced your body to work overtime just to survive." A wry, bitter flicker of a smile tugged at her lips. "I was left here," she said, feeling the rawness in her throat. "They shot me down. 13 days. She forced the words out. No one came. He paused, setting aside a small container of antibiotic gel. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I had no idea." He carefully removed the tattered remains of her armored vest. She gasped as the layers of fabric pulled free from burned skin. "I'll be careful," he promised. Her species possessed some traits similar to humans, but the differences were unmistakable up close. Her flesh beneath the greenish hue glowed with faint bioluminescence near the edges of the wound. She watched him watch her with rapt concentration, as if he found her as alien as she found him. With gentle touches, he began cleaning the gash. It hurt far more than she would have admitted, but she pressed her lips together, refusing to cry out. "What about your people?" he asked, not prying but clearly curious. "I mean, aren't they looking for you?" She let out a near-silent exhalation that might have been a laugh. "They're the ones who put me here," she said. "I disobeyed an order. That's all it takes where I'm from." A fresh wave of self-loathing twisted in her gut. She hadn't let herself speak these words aloud. They felt heavier than she expected. His eyes flicked to hers. He didn't speak for her. A moment, as if sensing the depth of betrayal in her tone. At last, he said, "I know something about being left behind." The statement hung in the stale air. Then he pressed a sealant over her wound. She shuddered at the cold sting, but it dulled the pain after a moment. She sank back onto the cot, exhaustion dragging at her lids. The ship's artificial gravity, gentle as it was, made her realize how weak she truly felt after so many days on that deserted moon. Jace rummaged for bandages, half smiling apologetically at the battered condition of his supplies. "It's not a real med bay," he admitted. "Just something I rigged so I could patch up if I got hurt hauling cargo or flying into dumb places." She blinked. "Thank you," she managed. "Even if I told you to go away." He chuckled softly, a sound that warmed the stale air. "I've never been good at walking away from a distress call." She gazed at him for a moment. He was the first living being she had seen since her commanding officer's face twisted in contempt, giving that final order to dispose of the defective. Her entire world had collapsed around that moment, and now here she was side by side with a man who seemed almost foolishly kind. Her lips parted, but she had no more words. The darkness of exhaustion claimed her, pulling her into a sleep deeper than she'd dared hope for in nearly 2 weeks. When she next woke, the throbbing ache in her side had settled into a dull pain. She was aware of soft vibrations through the floor. The ship was moving. Carefully, she pushed herself up, swallowing a groan as her body protested. She glanced around. The medbay's walls were lined with a few mismatched cabinets, old charts, and hoses that coiled overhead. It looked like it had once been a storage closet repurposed. A small overhead light flickered in and out, but gave just enough illumination. She saw him leaning in the doorway, arms folded. He nodded slightly when their eyes met, as if to greet her. "You're awake." He moved closer. She realized that in better light, his hair was actually a deep brown, and he had faint lines of weariness under his eyes. He offered a container of water again. She drank more carefully this time, forcing herself not to gulp too fast. "Where are we?" she asked. "I took off from that moon about 6 hours ago," he said, glancing at a small device strapped to his wrist. "We're still in the same system, but there's some asteroid debris near the outer edge. I'm hoping to hide out there while you get stabilized. I didn't want to stay put in case someone came looking." Her chest went tight. "My own people might be tracking me," she whispered. "They're not coming to save me, just to finish the job." His jaw clenched. "I figured as much." He lowered his voice. "We'll make sure that doesn't happen." She almost laughed at the absurdity of his confidence. He didn't know who she was up against. Then again, she no longer knew whether her superiors would waste more resources hunting her. For all she knew, they had already written her off. A fleeting hope. "You have no obligation to do this," she said. "You could drop me at any outpost." "I'm not in the best of shape to land on an official outpost either," he said, giving a lopsided grin. "There are some who'd like to see me pay for cargo runs that might have been less than legitimate. And anyway," he paused, gazing at her with a seriousness that caught her off guard. "I couldn't just abandon you." She swallowed, uncertain how to feel about that. "You still don't know anything about me." "Amali," he said softly, "I know enough. I know you're alive, you needed help, and someone tried to kill you. That's more than enough reason." She closed her eyes, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In her world, no one did anything without orders or a chain of command. The notion that he was simply acting on some personal moral code was foreign. Part of her wanted to argue, to say he was foolish. But another part, The wounded, terrified part was too grateful to speak. A clattering sound from the corridor made them both jump. He put a finger to his lips, cautioning silence. He slipped out of the med bay, his footsteps silent on the metal floor. She tensed, instincts flaring. Slowly, she eased her leg off the cot. Pain lanced up her thigh, but she braced her weight as best she could. If an intruder was aboard, she couldn't just lie there helpless. She crept forward, each step a jolt of agony. When she peered around the corner, she saw Jace rummaging through a supply crate that had toppled over. He exhaled, shaking his head at his own paranoia. Sensing her presence, he turned and motioned for her to come closer. False alarm, he whispered. Then he saw the look of pain etched in her features and gently steered her to a small seat near the corridor wall. You shouldn't be up. Her leg pulsed angrily. She clenched her teeth. I'm not used to letting others handle everything. He gave a faint smile. Stubborn. Yeah, I get that. He dug through the spilled crate's contents. A few ration packs, some hand tools, spare parts for the ship's life support. Anyway, if you can hold this panel in place for me, I can reattach it. We hit some turbulence leaving that moon, and half the interior storage isn't latched properly. She nodded, welcoming the distraction. Carefully, she held the panel in place while he fastened it. It hurt, but the motion felt almost normal. Working side by side, they finished in a couple of minutes. They returned the items to the crate, pushing it back into position. He looked at her. You feel all right? She managed a shrug. Better than I did on that moon. Good. He helped her to her feet. Despite his earlier protest, he let her walk, just keeping a careful hand near her elbow in case she lost her balance. The corridor led to the cockpit, a compact space with 2 chairs, a battered console, and a canopy of reinforced glass overhead. Through that glass, she glimpsed the star-speckled void of space. Asteroid fragments drifted in the distance, occasional glints of light marking potential collisions. It was oddly peaceful, a painting of cosmic debris that shielded them from prying scanners. She sank into the co-pilot's seat. He slid into the pilot's chair, tapping a few controls. Engines on standby, thrusters minimal. We're running cold, so we don't give off a signature. That's why it's a bit chilly in here. Indeed, the temperature was cooler than she might have liked. She tried not to shiver. You've done this before, she commented. He shrugged. Hiding from authorities, maybe. Hiding from an alien military? That's a first. His gaze flicked to her. You said they shot you down. Was it because you disobeyed a direct order? She lowered her eyes, pressing her hands against her lap. Yes, the order was to obliterate a settlement they claimed was a rebel cell. Children were in that settlement. I couldn't do it. She paused, feeling a knot in her throat. When my commander realized I'd rerouted power to let them evacuate, he put the blame for anything that went wrong on me. I was labeled defective. The punishment for that is final. A heavy silence settled. Finally, he nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. I lost my younger brother in a mining accident. Or at least that's what they called it. He sent out distress signals for hours, but no rescue came. Their official stance was that it was too dangerous to deploy a team. So they just let them die. He looked down at his hands. I promised myself if I ever heard a distress call, I'd answer. I guess that's how I ended up here. She felt a pang of empathy, something she had not allowed herself in a long time. I'm sorry, she said. I know what it's like to be ignored. He inhaled slowly. Then he gave her a small half-smile. We're a fine pair of outcasts, huh? Despite everything, she found herself returning that smile, albeit faintly. Seems so. There was a hush that followed, but it wasn't the uncomfortable emptiness she'd grown used to. It felt like a fragile understanding. Listen, he said, leaning forward. We can't stay here forever. We'll need to move eventually. If your people are as relentless as you imply, they might sweep this sector again. She nodded. We could try to find a neutral outpost. There might be some black market mechanics or safe harbors, but it's risky if they have informants. He tapped his fingers on the console. There's a frontier planet not far from here, Ilvatar. Mostly desert, but there's enough life to mask a ship's energy signature if we land away from the main settlement. We could at least do repairs there, stock up on supplies. She recognized the name vaguely. It's a refuge for smugglers, I heard. A place of harsh conditions. He snorted softly. I prefer to call them independent traders. But yeah, it's not fancy. We might blend in. He studied her face. What do you think? She hesitated. For so long, she had only looked out for herself, and with good reason. Yet here was someone asking for her opinion, letting her share in a decision. She weighed the danger. But was anywhere safe? All right, she said. Ilvatar. He nodded once, switching on a couple of systems with minimal power. The hum of the ship rose. She felt a twinge of fear, uncertain if this was truly wise, but for the first time in days, she also felt something else, hope. The flight to Ilvatar took a handful of hours, most spent in a tense near silence as they avoided shipping lanes and scanned for any sign of pursuit. She dozed fitfully, fighting dreams of her former squad mates, sneering as they left her to die. Each time she jolted awake, Jace was there at the console, quietly adjusting the flight path, or occasionally glancing her way with a reassuring nod. She didn't speak of the nightmares, and he didn't pry. At last, the planet swelled into view, a swirling mass of tan and rust-colored dunes, ringed by thick layers of dust storms that glowed orange under the star's light. Jace charted a course around the side with fewer storms, looking for a stable approach. Her breath caught at the sight of it, so alive compared to that dead moon. Yet it looked hostile in its own way, unforgiving deserts, a punishing sun. She supposed it was still better than the nothingness of space if they needed to hide. As they broke into Ilvatar's atmosphere, the ship rattled. Alarms bleated faintly. Jace cursed under his breath, tapping vigorously at the controls. Desert winds. They're stronger than usual. She winced as the ship bucked. I'll take a look at your thruster settings, she offered. He gestured for her to do so. With her specialized training in advanced systems, she quickly found that the ship's autopilot wasn't compensating properly for the crosswinds. She overrode the settings, manually recalibrating. The improvement was immediate, though still rough. When they landed, the ground was a cracked plateau overlooking a valley of ochre rock. The sky overhead was a blinding white-yellow haze. Through the cockpit glass, she saw spindly shapes of cacti, or something akin to them, their needle-like fronds swaying in the heat. Jace powered down the engines, but kept the scanners active on low yield. Outside, the temperature soared. At first, it felt almost pleasant to her body, which had been chilled for so long. But soon she realized her wounds still demanded care, and the dryness irritated her. She limped as they descended the ramp. Jace steadied her, glancing around warily. No sign of immediate threats, but that didn't mean they were safe. The shimmering heat distorted everything beyond a few dozen meters. We'll need to check local conditions, Jace said, tapping a small device. There's a settlement about 100 kilometers east, too far to risk traveling there on foot. We'll see if we can fix the coolant leak in my engine, then maybe we can fly there without attracting attention. She nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead. At least she could breathe this atmosphere, though it was scorching and dry. Together, they circled the ship to inspect the damage. A cracked vent near the lower hull was seeping fluid. She knelt as best she could, ignoring the protest of her splinted leg, and examined it. We'll need a replacement line. It's corroded. He exhaled. I might have something that'll hold for a little while. He motioned her to follow him back inside. The cargo hold was cluttered with crates of old mechanical parts, salvage from who knew where. She picked through them, occasionally pausing to cough from the dust. In the quiet, she found herself unexpectedly comforted by the mundane task of rummaging for tubes and clamps. It felt normal, almost domestic, so different from her life in a rigid hierarchy where every breath was measured. Jace rummaged on the opposite side. Now and then, he'd hold up a piece, and she'd shake her head or nod. After a few minutes, she located a flexible polymer tube that might do the job. When they returned to patch the hull, a gust of hot wind battered them. She shielded her face, squinting. Over the roar of wind, she thought she heard something else, a mechanical whine far off. Tensing, she gestured for Jace to listen. He tilted his head, then frowned. Could be a sand sailor, he said quietly. They're desert vehicles some scavengers use. Her pulse quickened. Do we want to avoid them? We do if we can, he answered. But if they see a landed ship, they might investigate. She considered this, then forced her battered body to move faster. Jace did the same, hurriedly attaching the makeshift hose. Her hands trembled from exertion, but they got the patch in place. All the while, the whine in the distance grew more pronounced, like an insect's buzz amplified into an engine's roar. She could picture it, a rickety craft skimming over the dunes, maybe filled with bandits or opportunists. She didn't know which was worse. Once the repair was done, they rushed back inside, sealing the ramp. The whine was closer now. In the cockpit, Jace powered up just enough to run scans. I see 2 small vehicles, moving fast, he reported. Armed, I think. Probably not official authorities, maybe smugglers or raiders. She swallowed, adrenaline spiking. They might come looking for loot. He nodded grimly. We don't have the weaponry to hold off a full assault if they have heavy arms. Our best bet might be to hide or lift off and hope the patch holds. Her mind raced. We can't outrun them in the air if the engine fails. But on the ground, we're sitting targets. She closed her eyes, remembering the lethal efficiency of the squads she once served with. Even a small band of determined raiders could wreak havoc on a damaged ship. Jace's fingers drummed on the console. Then he made a quick decision. We'll lift. If the patch fails, we'll come back down a bit farther away. Hopefully out of their range. Better than being boarded. She agreed wordlessly. He fired the engines. The ship trembled and rose awkwardly from the cracked plateau. The desert wind whipped dust in swirling clouds beneath them. A grinding sound from the hull told her the patch was being strained. She bit her lip, checking the readouts. Pressures were climbing, but still within a borderline range. She looked out the cockpit window, scanning the horizon. Sure enough, 2 specks of metal glinted in the dunes, speeding forward. A bright orange flash erupted, a projectile. She gasped as the shot whizzed wide, smashing into a boulder below in a plume of sand. Jace cursed, adjusting thrusters. The entire vessel lurched. Alarms beeped, complaining about the mismatch of engine pressure. She scrambled to help, keying in a manual override. The hull groaned, but they gained altitude. Another shot soared by, missing again but closer. Jace banked the ship away from them, the engines sputtering dangerously. She clutched the console, ignoring the pain that flared in her side. The adrenaline overshadowed it for now. If they went down in this desert with those raiders waiting, they'd be finished. She heard Jace's breath hitch as he fought the controls. Hold together, he muttered to the ship. The readings danced dangerously on the cusp of red. Through the streaked cockpit glass, a swirl of dust parted, revealing open sky. They cleared the immediate range of the raiders, though they couldn't climb too high or risk another meltdown. The ship rattled like an old freight elevator. Then, mercifully, the blast ceased, either out of range or because the raiders realized they couldn't shoot them down easily. Amali slumped back, exhaling a shaking breath. That was close. Welcome to Ilvatar, Jace said wryly. It's an acquired taste. She let out something halfway between a laugh and a sigh, pressing her hand against her side as the throbbing resumed. Their escape was precarious. The engine was in dire condition, and if the temperature soared too high, they'd be forced to land again. For now, though, they had some distance. Jace guided the ship across the desert, skirting the edges of a massive dust storm. Veins of lightning crackled inside that storm, an otherworldly sight. They found a rocky canyon, a place where the walls soared high enough to provide some camouflage. Jace settled the ship carefully on a ridge, wincing at every lurch. Once they touched down, the engine sighed, their hum dropping to a low rumble. He ran his hands through his hair, exhausted. She could almost feel the tension in his posture, the unresolved question. What now? She shifted, stifling a groan as she moved. We should probably see if the patch is still holding, she said. He nodded, still catching his breath. Yeah. Before they could follow through, a wave of dizziness overtook her. She pressed a hand to her forehead, blinking. He saw it instantly and stood. Hey, take it easy. You're in no shape to crawl around under the hull again. I'll be fine, she insisted, but her voice wavered. The floor seemed to tilt. She felt his arms supporting her before she could protest further. Lie down, he urged. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the strength. The events of the last hour had ripped open the scab of her injuries. He led her to a small bench behind the cockpit seats, letting her recline. He knelt beside her, scanning her vitals with a handheld device. She turned her head away, not wanting to see the reading. She knew she was in bad shape. Her leg, her side, and the underlying exhaustion from nearly 2 weeks of deprivation. How bad? She muttered, eyes closed. You're stable, he answered, though his tone sounded uncertain. You need rest, food, fluids, and better medical care than I can give. He paused. If we can find some safer outpost, or a medic who won't ask too many questions. Her heart panged with longing for something as simple as healing. But she had to remain practical. If my people find me on a public outpost, they'll kill me. Maybe kill you too, if you're with me. He exhaled, frustration evident in the silence that followed. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. In that moment, a flash of guilt coursed through her. She had dragged him into this. He had a life, or so she assumed, and now he was tangled in her lethal problems. A pang in her chest reminded her that the alternative was her certain death alone on that moon. Selfishly, she wanted to cling to the only lifeline she had found. He seemed to read the conflict in her expression. Gently, he placed a hand over hers. We'll figure it out, he said, one step at a time. They decided to remain in the canyon until nightfall or the local equivalent. While Ilvatar's day/night cycle was not exactly Earth standard, the planet did experience a cooler period when the star's position shifted. They hoped that under cover of darkness, they might venture closer to a settlement or at least scavenge supplies from some lesser-known trading post. Jace rummaged in the ship's small galley and returned with ration bars that tasted of stale bread mixed with a hint of spice. Amali ate slowly, forcing each bite down. Even this small meal felt luxurious compared to the near starvation she endured on the moon. As the heat outside waned, Jace stepped out to check the patch. Amali insisted on accompanying him, though she mostly just observed, holding a light so he could see. He clanked around under the hull, cursing once or twice as he found new microfractures in the engine casing. It was clear the ship could fly, but not for long. If they pushed too hard, they'd be grounded with no means of escape. Afterward, they climbed back onto the ridge to survey their surroundings. The canyon walls loomed overhead, their surfaces layered with centuries of wind erosion. The sky had taken on a dusky purple reminiscent of the coloring on her old prison moon, and for a moment, the similarity made her shudder. She felt the memory of that cold seep in. Then the difference struck her. Here, she wasn't alone. She looked to Jace. He stood with one hand resting on a chunk of rock, scanning the horizon with keen eyes. The lines of worry were etched on his face, but there was also a steadiness to him, as if he had long grown used to living in precarious situations. An outcast, just like her. The thought warmed her in a way she couldn't fully describe. He caught her staring and raised an eyebrow. What's on your mind? She hesitated. You risked your life for me. He shrugged. I risk my life every time I fly in half these backwater sectors. She offered a soft, humorless laugh. That's not the same. I'm not your responsibility. A flash of something crossed his features. Pain, perhaps. My brother wasn't my responsibility either, if you think about it. We each had our own jobs. But the day he died, it hit me hard. No one showed up for him, not even me. I swore I wouldn't make that mistake again. He looked away. Anyway, it's done. We're here. You matter. That's reason enough. Those words resonated with her in a way she was unprepared for. You matter. She had never heard them from her own kind. Her worth was measured by obedience, by performance. If she had hesitated in the line of duty, that meant she was worthless. But here was someone who believed she was worth saving simply because she existed. She turned her gaze to the rocky horizon. The wind hissed, carrying faint grains of sand that scratched across the stone. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself accept his words without protest. They climbed back aboard the ship as the sky deepened. In the cockpit, Jace initiated a low-power flight, skimming just above the canyon floor. He guided them cautiously, hoping to find any sign of civilization without drawing attention. Amali sat beside him, scanning for signals. Nothing major showed up, except faint pulses that might be geological or artificially generated. She tried narrowing the frequency. Finally, a fragment of a coded ping appeared. "Do you see that?" she asked, pointing at the console. He nodded. "Yeah, could be a small settlement or a trading post. It's about 30 kilometers from here. Let's check it out." They soared across dunes and rock formations in near silence, the thrusters running low to avoid large dust clouds. The darkness helped conceal them, though it was an eerie flight, broken only by the faint lights on the console. Amali's hand occasionally drifted to the side of the seat, gripping it when turbulence made her wounds flare. Eventually, they spotted a cluster of structures below, hidden in a sinkhole-like depression in the canyon. A handful of dim lights dotted the settlement. No more than a dozen buildings, perhaps constructed of scrap metal and shaped to withstand sandstorms. Jace landed the ship a fair distance away, behind a rocky outcrop. They decided to approach on foot. Though her legs screamed in pain, she insisted on coming. She argued that she might identify potential threats better than he could, given her own background with military tactics. He relented, but he wrapped extra bandages around her splint to stabilize it. The trek across the sand was brutal. She had to lean on him more than she wanted to. Their footprints left a trail in the moonlight, which concerned her, but the swirling wind quickly obscured them. The night air was cooler, though still arid. When they reached the outskirts of the settlement, a crude fence made of sharpened metal posts encircled the perimeter. They slipped around to a gap near a rock wall. Inside, the buildings looked cobbled together from rusted hulls of old ships. Dim lights flickered, powered by a generator that rattled somewhere in the center of town. A few silhouettes moved among the structures, but it seemed quiet, not bustling. They found a deserted corner, crouching in the shadow of a corrugated metal shed. Jace peered around the edge. "I see a sign. Looks like a makeshift clinic," he whispered. "Might have medical supplies. Maybe we can barter." She swallowed. "If they let us in." He nodded. "We have to try. You need better care, and we could use some gear for the ship. I have a few universal credits left. Hopefully they're accepted." They approached the clinic carefully. A battered sign hovered in the dusty air, partially in a language she didn't recognize, partially in some human script. The inside was lit by a single overhead lamp. A figure, presumably the medic, sat behind a table, hunched over a manual. When they entered, the figure looked up sharply. He was a gaunt man with skin the color of bronze, wearing goggles pushed up on his forehead. He spoke in a coarse voice. "You're out late." Jace raised his hands, palms out. "We don't want trouble. We're just travelers. My friend is hurt. We need supplies." The man's eyes flicked to Amali. She could see the moment he realized she was alien. He tensed, but then quickly forced a neutral expression. "I don't care what you are," he said. "If you can pay, I'll treat you." He stood, gesturing to a rickety cot in the corner. "Sit." She hesitated, but obliged, wincing as she lowered herself onto it. Jace offered a few chips of currency. The medic's eyes shone with interest, though he tried to hide it. He accepted them and began examining Amali's injuries. The deeper he looked, the more he muttered to himself about the unusual physiology. Still, he seemed competent enough. He carefully removed the old bandages and applied a stronger antiseptic. She bit back a hiss at the sting. "Where'd you get shot?" he asked at one point, noticing the burned edges in her armor. She didn't reply. The man shrugged, not pushing for details. Jace hovered protectively, scanning the small clinic for possible threats. When the medic finished, he handed Jace a small pack of supplies, along with instructions on how to apply them. "She'll heal, but it'll take time. If you want to rest here, it'll cost extra." He didn't sound particularly sympathetic. Jace shook his head. "We'll be leaving soon." The medic simply nodded, sliding the credits into a drawer. As they were about to leave, the door banged open. A wiry figure with a bandana around his face strode in, brandishing a sidearm. Amali froze, instincts flaring. The newcomer glared at them, then at the medic. "Doc, you seen any off-worlders around?" he demanded. "There's a rumor some fancy ship landed in the canyon. Me and my boys are looking to have a talk with them." The medic's gaze flicked to Jace and Amali. She felt the tension spike. If the medic betrayed them, they'd be cornered. She shifted, ready to grab the makeshift blade hidden under her cloak. Jace's posture stiffened. The medic surprised her. He grunted in annoyance and said, "No off-worlders here. These two are just local folks from the other side of the dunes. She's been hurt. That's all I know. Now get lost. I'm in the middle of a procedure." The newcomer narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. Amali held her breath, but the medic gave him a fierce scowl. Perhaps the man realized that starting a fight in the clinic might cost him if he needed the doc's help later. He spat on the floor. "If you see anything suspicious, you better report it." He jabbed a finger at them. "And if I find out you lied." He let the threat hang. Then he stomped out, letting the door slam behind him. Jace exhaled shakily. The medic shrugged. "Go, before he brings his friends." They left quickly, stepping back into the dusty night air. Once outside, they exchanged a silent look of relief. With fresh bandages and medication, Amali's leg felt more stable, though she was still far from healthy. They made their way past the fence, trying to avoid attention. Once out of the settlement's perimeter, they trudged across the canyon floor onto the stars. Twice, they froze when they heard distant hover bikes or footsteps, but they stayed hidden among rocks until the sounds passed. By the time they reached the ship, both were exhausted. Amali's leg throbbed to the point of numbness. Jace helped her onto the ramp. Inside, they sealed the hatch and collapsed in the dim corridor. She realized how close they were sitting, shoulders touching, breath mingling in the quiet space. She turned to him, meaning to thank him for everything, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she let her head rest against his shoulder, letting the storm of emotions swirl inside. He didn't move away. They lingered there, not speaking, listening to each other's breathing. She felt an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with physical wounds. She was terrified of losing again, losing the one person who had shown her kindness. They had known each other only a short time, yet it felt as though he had always been a missing piece of her world. She pulled back, clearing her throat. "We should rest," she said softly. "Tomorrow we figure out our next move." He nodded, not pushing the conversation further. They retreated to their separate quarters. She used the new medical salve the medic had given them, wincing at the sting, but welcoming the prospect of proper healing. When morning came, if one could call it morning in this alien day cycle, they set about more repairs. Jace installed the new clamps and lines. She adjusted the ship's cooling system so it could handle the desert heat. By midday, the vessel was in better shape. Not perfect, but maybe enough to traverse to a safer region. They launched, hugging the canyon walls. She kept a close eye on the sensors. Once they cleared the canyon, the desert stretched out in rippling dunes. The settlement they'd visited was barely visible behind them. No sign of the bandits or raiders for now. She let herself breathe a little easier. Just as they were discussing their next heading, an alarm shrilled. She tensed, scanning the console. A large, high-speed craft was closing in fast from the east. Her blood went cold. The signature pattern matched something suspiciously close to her people's strike ships. Jace cursed. "This can't be a coincidence," she murmured, heart pounding. "They must have traced your rescue or recognized your ship's signature." He grimaced. "We can't outrun them in a direct chase." He flicked switches, searching for options. They banked hard, the ship trembling under the strain. The inbound craft locked onto them, scanning. She recognized the pattern of that scanner from memory, a soldier's tactic, a prelude to firing. They wove between dust storms, hoping to break the line of sight. The dust clouded sensors on both sides. But then a bolt of energy sliced through the swirling haze, striking near the hull. Jace yanked the controls, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. The backwash rattled them violently. Sparks showered from an overhead panel. Alarms bleated in dissonance. "Can we hide?" she asked, her voice tight. Looking, he spat, scanning the terrain. He spotted a narrow valley with jagged spires of rock. The wind howled through it, creating lethal gusts. It's risky, but it might be our only shot. She nodded fiercely. Do it. They dove toward the valley. The crosswinds hammered them. Jace wrestled with the controls, but the thrusters whined in protest. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely think. Another blast roared behind them, but it missed, colliding with a cliff face in a spray of molten rock. The strike ship soared overhead, then circled back, trying to get a clean shot. Desperate, Jace forced the Hawthorne, a name she recalled him mentioning for his ship, into a crevice where the dust funneled in cyclones. The strike ship hesitated, not wanting to risk a crash. They scraped along the valley floor, metal shrieking as they clipped a stone outcrop. She cursed in pain as the impact jolted her. But they managed to keep flying lower, deeper into the labyrinth of rocks. Hold on, Jace roared, banking sharply. The hull slammed against a pillar, tearing open a portion of the outer plating. A hiss of atmosphere leaked, but they continued forward. The controls dimmed. She coughed as smoke stung her eyes. The main console flickered. They were losing power. Finally, the thrusters sputtered out. They skidded across sand and came to a grating halt near the mouth of the cave. The strike ship's silhouette passed overhead, searching, but perhaps the thick dust and the rock canopy concealed them. She sagged in her seat, chest heaving. Jace killed the last of the engine noise, leaving them in near darkness. An eerie quiet fell, broken by the metallic groans of the hull and their ragged breaths. They had no time to relax. Any moment, the strike ship might land and deploy ground troops. Jace grabbed a small bag of essentials. She steeled herself, wincing as she stood. They exited through the side hatch, coughing on smoke. The damage to the hull was severe. Hiding inside wasn't safe if the enemy used scanning or bombs. But the cave before them might offer a chance to slip away. Let's go, Jace whispered, supporting her weight. Her leg felt like fire, but she forced herself to move. They left the battered ship behind, stepping into the cave's dim interior. The wind outside roared, swirling dust in the entrance. The deeper they went, the quieter it grew, until only the drip of subterranean condensation echoed in the gloom. Her heart pounded. She had been in enough training exercises to know that if her people had indeed followed her here, they wouldn't stop until they confirmed her death. Jace kept a hand on his sidearm, nerves taut. The darkness pressed in, so he flicked on a small flashlight. The cave walls glimmered with veins of mineral deposits. Small pools of water stood in pockets, a sign that this place might extend far underground. Behind them, a thud reverberated. They ducked behind a rock formation. Through the swirling dust at the cave entrance, they saw silhouettes, at least two figures armed. The faint glow of their suits indicated advanced tactical gear, her people's standard issue for ground infiltration. Her breath seized. She recalled the expression of her superior, how easily they would kill to uphold protocol. Jace tensed, noticing her panic. He gently squeezed her hand. The unspoken comfort was enough to steady her. They retreated deeper into the cavern, footsteps echoing dangerously. They had to find a place to hide before the soldiers cornered them. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming a shallow stream that trickled along the floor. The passage branched left and right, forming a labyrinth. At each junction, they picked a direction almost at random, hoping to keep as far from the entrance as possible. Once, Jace paused, scanning the rocky walls for any sign of a hideaway. He found a crevice high up, reachable only if they climbed. Her leg felt like lead, but there was no choice. He climbed first, then extended a hand down. She grit her teeth and forced her body up, ignoring the pain. The ridges of the rock were slippery with condensation. Her fingers trembled as she groped for purchase. At last, she made it into the crevice. It was narrow, but once inside, it opened into a small chamber. They crouched there, hearts thudding. The muffled sounds of pursuit echoed below, faint vibrations carrying through the stone. They stayed silent, scarcely daring to breathe. After an excruciating wait, the footsteps receded. She closed her eyes in relief, though she knew the threat wasn't over. Jace wrapped an arm around her for warmth. She realized she was shaking, half from fear, half from blood loss. He pressed a makeshift bandage against her side, noticing a fresh bleed. "We need to get you help," he whispered. She grimaced. "I'm sorry. I'm slowing you down." "Stop," he said firmly. "I won't leave you." The finality in his tone left no room for argument. She sank against him, exhaustion pulling at every fiber. Their predicament felt dire, but in that closeness, a spark of solace remained. They drifted in and out of a half-awake state, forced to keep silent. The sound of rummaging or distant plasma blasts occasionally echoed through the cavern. Perhaps her pursuers were searching. Maybe they had discovered the crippled ship. Hours crawled by. Jace rubbed her arms to keep the blood flowing, whispered reassuring words that even he might not fully believe. Eventually, the noise subsided. Silence returned, broken only by dripping water. Jace carefully peered out of the crevice, scanning the darkness. Nothing moved. He helped her out, and they climbed down. Her legs screamed at every shift, but she fought to remain upright. They made a slow trek through the tunnels, guided by the faint beam of the flashlight. At last, they emerged onto a rocky ledge far from where they entered. The desert sky was lighter, another day beginning. The strike ship was nowhere in sight, though swirling dust obscured the horizon. They were free of immediate danger, but stranded with no vessel. Jace exhaled, sliding down to sit on a rock. She sank beside him, tears threatening to fill her eyes, though her kind did not shed them in the same way. "What do we do?" she asked, voice hollow. "We survive," he said. "We find a way to signal for help that won't lead your enemies straight to us. Maybe we can fix the ship or hitch a ride with someone who isn't trying to kill us." She nodded wearily, pressing a hand to her side. The fight inside her felt nearly spent, but the warmth of Jace's presence rekindled a small flame. She recalled how he said she mattered. If he believed that, maybe she could hold on a bit longer. Maybe they both could find a future where neither of them was abandoned or hunted. They rose, step by painful step, determined to keep moving. Jace carried her weight when her leg failed. She clung to him, letting his strength guide her. With no guarantee of rescue, no allies in sight, it seemed impossible. Yet in the depths of that desert canyon, far from any comfort or security, they had each other. And in a universe where neither of them had belonged, that was more than they had ever hoped for. They pressed on for what felt like hours, spurred by necessity. The scorching sun was rising, intensifying the swirl of dust. Eventually, they stumbled across the wreckage of a small structure, some old campsite or trading post, half buried in rockslide debris. It wasn't much, but it offered partial shelter from the sun and enough scrap to perhaps build a new beacon. Jay set her down on a piece of flattened metal that might once have been a rooftop. She leaned back, panting. "We can set up something here," he said. "We can't go far without risking those soldiers spotting us again." She nodded. He rummaged through the debris, unearthing coils of wire, cracked solar cells, bits of metal plating. Amali tried to help, but her arms felt leaden. Finally, he insisted she rest while he worked. She watched him tinker with the scraps, trying to fashion a comm device. Now and then, he asked for her input, and she guided him on frequency modulation. Her own training with advanced systems gave him a fighting chance of making it functional. Time blurred. She drifted in a haze of discomfort. Her side burned, her leg felt cold, and the desert heat tore at her throat. Jace eventually brought her a container of water he found in a half-collapsed storeroom. It tasted stale, but it was water. "You hang in there," he told her, voice trembling. "Almost done." She nodded weakly. Another wave of darkness threatened her vision, but she clung to consciousness by focusing on the bright spark of his eyes, the sound of his breath. She had never been so intimately reliant on another being. It stirred a fear in her, but also something else, something she had never dared to name. At last, Jace let out a triumphant exclamation. "I think I've got it. A basic transmitter using the old solar cells. It won't be strong, but might reach a passing freighter or smuggler willing to take a risk for credits. She forced herself to sit up. We need a coded signal, or else my people might intercept it. But if we bury it in standard commercial chatter, maybe they'll ignore it. He nodded. Let's do it. She directed him to input a certain pattern, then cloak it among shipping logs. It wasn't foolproof, but it might slip under her people's specialized scanning. They turned it on, letting the sunlight charge the cells. The transmitter hummed quietly, a new lifeline cast into the void. That day stretched interminably. She drifted in and out, head on his lap, listening to the faint crackle of the device. Occasionally, a burst of static came through, but no reply. Jace stroked her hair, murmuring that it was going to be okay. She wondered if he truly believed that, or if he was just trying to keep her calm. Night came. They huddled together in the ruined shelter, listening for any sign of approach. The desert was eerily quiet, aside from the distant shriek of wind. The transmitter glowed in the corner, repeating its coded plea over and over. Amali closed her eyes, leaning into Jace. She felt the steady rise and fall of his chest, felt the warmth of his breath on her temple. She realized with a jolt that she was falling for him in a way she had never experienced. Not just gratefulness, but a deep, trembling bond forged by survival and empathy. He must have felt it too, because his fingers curled around hers, gently, tentatively, as though asking permission. She pressed back, letting their hands interlace. In that silence, the wariness that always framed her existence began to ease. He tilted her chin up, meeting her gaze. Her heart pounded. Their lips brushed, soft at first, more question than certainty. Then she answered the question with a quiet surrender, letting that moment speak of everything they had endured together. It was a kiss made potent by the knowledge that either of them could die tomorrow, that their future was as uncertain as the shifting dunes. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, exhaling. "You matter," he whispered again, this time as a vow. She swallowed, overwhelmed. "So do you," she whispered back. Then the hush returned, a hush that felt more comforting than empty. They settled close, allowing themselves a fleeting moment of something like peace in a galaxy that had offered them none. She awoke sometime later to the crackle of the transmitter. Her eyes snapped open, heart hammering. Jace stirred, hand instinctively reaching for the small sidearm. They listened. A garbled voice came through, faint but unmistakable. Someone was responding, though it was unclear what they were saying. Jace scrambled to the device, adjusting dials, coaxing clarity from the static. Amali pushed herself up despite the pain. Through the speaker came a voice in a language neither recognized at first. Then it switched to a standard trade dialect. "Signal. Receiving coordinates?" Jace's eyes lit with hope. He pressed the makeshift transmit button. "Yes, we're here. We need rescue. We have some credits. Can you land?" A pause, then. "Hostile territory, dangerous. We can attempt an approach if you have payment." He looked at Amali. She nodded. They had little choice. He gave the approximate location, though he tried to keep it vague enough that a potential enemy couldn't pinpoint them exactly. The voice replied that they would attempt to come at dawn, but no promises. They'd signal again before landing. Then the line went dead. "Do you think we could trust them?" she asked, anxiety tight in her chest. He shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. "Maybe. We'll have to stay alert. But it's our best shot." They barely slept. When dawn's light peeked over the ridge, they positioned themselves behind a chunk of fallen debris, waiting. The transmitter remained active. Finally, the beep of an approaching craft registered. On Jace's handheld scanner, he tensed, scanning its signature. It did not match the design of her people's vessels. That was good news, at least. She held her breath as the craft descended. It was a squat, blocky ship with mismatched thrusters, reminiscent of a salvage hauler. The cargo ramp lowered, revealing two figures in worn jackets. They seemed tense, scanning the area. Jace stepped out carefully, hands raised to show he wasn't armed. Amali followed as best she could, legs shaking under her weight. "Payment first," one of them said, a tall woman with a scar across her cheek. Jace handed over what remained of his credits, and a small stash of items from his ship that he had salvaged. The woman examined them. She nodded once. "Good enough," she muttered. "Get on board. We leave now." Amali and Jace exchanged a look, then limped up the ramp. The interior of the hauler smelled of burnt circuitry and stale air, but it was safer than the open desert. The ramp closed. Engines roared, lifting them off the sands. She felt a mixture of relief and dread. They were escaping Ilvatar, but where to next? Her questions multiplied when, after a few minutes of flight, the tall woman approached them. "We're crossing the edge of the system," she said. "We can drop you on a neutral station, or you can pay extra for somewhere else. Doesn't matter to us." Jace glanced at Amali. She recalled the endless chase, the possibility that her own kind might still lurk beyond. But a neutral station might have enough traffic to lose themselves in. She nodded. "Station," she said softly. Jace turned to the woman. "There's a station called Ellis Post, not too far from here, I think. It's known for, well, letting folks disappear if they pay enough." The woman shrugged. "Fine. Ellis Post it is. Don't cause trouble on my ship." She went back to the cockpit. Amali let out a breath. Jace put an arm around her shoulders, guiding her to a makeshift seat. They sank down, exhaustion catching up at last. She leaned her head on his shoulder, letting the tension drain from her. Everything was uncertain, but they had survived one more day. He brushed a strand of her hair away from her face. "How's the pain?" he asked softly. "Bearable," she murmured. The medication from the clinic and the relief of escaping had dulled the worst of it. She felt the steady thump of his heartbeat through his chest. The memory of that kiss in the desert shelter flooded her mind. A fragile warmth bloomed in her chest. They sat there in silence for a while, lulled by the engine's vibrations. This cramped, worn hauler was no paradise, but it carried them away from imminent death. That was enough for the moment. After a few hours, the hum changed pitch. Through a small porthole, they saw stars again. Ilvatar receded, a swirling sphere of dust behind them. Amali swallowed hard. She wondered if she would ever be safe, truly. If they arrived at Ellis Post, could she find a life free from the condemnation of her own people? And would Jace remain at her side? She knew she wanted him to, more than anything, yet the fear of burdening him gnawed at her. As if sensing her thoughts, he took her hand, rubbing his thumb over her knuckles. She squeezed back, letting the moment say what she couldn't put into words. Outside, starlight shimmered. She recalled the lonely glimmer of that moon where she had waited 13 days. How different it felt now, to be leaving that memory behind, forging a new path with the one person who refused to walk away. When the cargo ship docked at Ellis Post, the reality of their uncertain future descended upon them like a weight. They parted ways with the salvage crew after handing over the last bit of payment. The station corridors bustled with beings of many species, all pushing past in the neon-lit gloom. Jace and Amali hobbled along, seeking a quiet corner to gather their thoughts. She could see the curiosity in the eyes of passerby who noticed her alien features, but no one stopped them. This was a place of secrets, after all, where no one asked too many questions. They found an isolated alcove near a half-functioning service lift. She leaned against the wall, her leg aching, her side still bandaged. Jace stood close, scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. A faint whiff of fried food and mechanical grease clung to the air. This place felt claustrophobic, but at least it was not in the sights of an execution squad. "What now?" she asked, voice subdued. He frowned, searching her face. "We find a small room, let you heal. Then maybe we buy a second-hand ship, or sign on with a freighter that doesn't ask for identification. We can vanish into the outer rims." She nodded. "I don't want to run forever, but I don't see another choice." He took her hand gently, guiding her away from the lift. "As long as we're together," he said, "I can handle running." She felt a lump in her throat. She had never been precious to anyone. But now, in the swirl of neon, signs and strange faces, she saw that Jace meant it. They limped through the station's winding corridors, eventually finding a small lodging kiosk. Jace offered some items he still had, a watch, a minor navigational device, for trade. The kiosk's owner, a bored-looking reptilian with a raspy voice, finally agreed. They received a key to a cramped cabin near the station's lower decks. It was small, a single bed, a flickering light, and an outdated terminal. It was private and lockable. Inside, the overhead panel hummed. Amali sank onto the bed with a groan of relief, the tension leaving her muscles for the first time in days. Jace closed the door behind them, slipping the latch. He crossed to her side, kneeling. "Let me see," he said, carefully peeling back her bandage. She flinched but allowed it. The wound was healing, albeit slowly. He applied fresh salve from the clinic pack, then rewrapped it. She studied his face, noticing the lines of fatigue. "You should rest too," she whispered. "You've done so much." He nodded, brushing it off. "I will. Just wanted to make sure you're okay." When he was done, he sat beside her. The bed was barely wide enough for two, but they made it work, leaning against each other in the claustrophobic space. The overhead light buzzed, flickering from time to time. She hesitated, then reached out, placing a hand on his cheek. He looked at her, eyes weary but kind. A spark passed between them, the same charge that ignited in the desert. "Thank you," she murmured, "for hearing my call, for coming when no one else did." He breathed out a soft laugh. "Couldn't help it. Guess your voice carried further than you think." Then his expression sobered. He leaned in, resting his forehead against hers. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "We'll make a life somewhere else, away from the ones who left us behind. You and me, all right." She felt tears well in her eyes, tears that her species rarely shed, but that she couldn't hold back. She pressed her lips to his in a tender, lingering kiss, letting that moment hold all her gratitude and all her longing for a future. When they broke apart, she could see the reflection of the flickering light in the moisture at the corners of his eyes. In that run-down station cabin, exhausted, wounded, and hunted, they found a promise of belonging. It was fragile, to be sure, but it was theirs. Whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together. And if the galaxy was a vast, uncaring place, then they would carve out a corner of it where each was heard, each was seen. She laid her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. 13 days of solitary agony had led her to this embrace. The battered soldier who had once believed she was unworthy of life now clung to a human who refused to let go. Outside, the station's murmur pressed on, indifferent to the small story unfolding in this cramped room. But for them, it was everything. As the hum of distant engines lulled them, they drifted to sleep in each other's arms. There, in the hush of a place that wasn't quite home, but was at least a shelter, she whispered her name one more time, soft against his ear, reclaiming the syllables for herself. She was Amali, exile, survivor, and, at last, a woman who mattered to someone. Through the hush of half-sleep, she felt him stir and whisper back his own name. Jace, the man who'd chosen compassion over caution. In that quiet, they both understood. They weren't alone anymore, and that single truth was more powerful than any chain of command or brand of defectiveness. They would keep running if they had to, keep hiding if there was no other choice, but now they ran together. And in a universe so wide and often cruel, that small bond of hope was the greatest victory either of them had ever claimed.